It was sort of like, yeah, he's given the blue belts a hard time. Let's hand him a blue belt. He's given the purple belts a hard time. Let's hand him a purple belt. But if you're just basing it on your execution on the mat live, well, everybody plays their A game. You might have a very simple game. In fact, there are incredible people at the highest levels of competition that just play a very simple game that constitutes their A game. That tells you nothing about how broad their knowledge is, how deep their knowledge is. And so I think there needs to be some objective standards there.
Welcome to Forever White Belt. I'm your host, Adolfo Ferranda. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Rick Ellis, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Roy Dean and the visionary behind the Art of Skill platform. Rick shares profound insights into Jiu-Jitsu through his popular YouTube channel and website, featuring some of the world's top instructors. Based in San Diego, he offers online courses and personalized training sessions and leads seminars and camps domestically and internationally. In this episode, we delve into Rick's journey in martial arts, his philosophy on teaching, and the creation of Art of Skill. Whether you're a seasoned practitioner or new to jiu-jitsu, Rick's experiences and perspectives will inspire and inform. And with that, I give you Rick Ellis.
Rick, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Adolfo. My pleasure to be here.
Oh, man, I'm so stoked to finally get you on the show. So you are a Roy Dean black belt, correct?
Correct. I was his 7th black belt. You know, it's funny. I was basically his first student when he opened his school in Bend, Oregon. Me and Jimmy, the two of us were in class that very first day. So, you know, you're competitive with yourself. I'm going to be the first black belt, but no, I'm old and it just takes longer. And I was his 7th.
I know you guys talked him into opening an academy there. How'd you guys wing that?
Well, he was, he came up to teach a little seminar to our little motley crew of guys that were trying to learn how to grapple on Thursday nights at a Taekwondo school. Jimmy was the connection. He was from San Diego. Roy had gone to college in San Diego and was working as an audio engineer in a studio. And I used to be an audio engineer. So he came up as a brown belt on the cusp of black to teach a little seminar. And he and I hit it off because of our shared background. And he said, I'm not sure that audio is my path. I think I want to open a school. And about 6 months later, he moved up to Bend, Oregon.
A beautiful location too.
It's a gorgeous location. I mean, now it's a little, overcrowded. It's
right.
Too much of a good thing now, but in those days it was pretty nice.
Yeah. So now you are in San Diego, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And are you still at Clark Gracie's down there?
Yeah, I trained mostly at Clark. San Diego is such an incredible environment. When I first moved down here, I didn't think I was going to move back to California. I lived in California, many years earlier. And of course, there's a woman involved and in influencing my decisions. So I ended up moving to San Diego. And when I first showed up, I just started hitting open mats all over the place. I'd go to Keenan's, I'd go to Baroom's, I'd go to, Studio 540, I'd go wherever, just to get the vibe. And ultimately, Clark's, they were probably the most inviting to me. Like when I showed up, some of his guys really, they knew who I was and they're like, yeah, this is your place, man. And they really invited me. And also it's a 6-minute drive from my house. So, you can't beat the location. So that's where I'm mostly hanging out.
As you mentioned, it's such a unique environment down there in San Diego. I talked to a lot of these people. I know you've done some training at Legion. Some of the Legion people probably crisscross and everything. I hear there's a lot of cross training down there. I talk to Autos people that go to Legion people that go to Autos, all over the place.
Yeah, it's open source down here. And there's compared to the old days of jiu-jitsu where everything was very tightly proprietary. And if you dared step outside of your home dojo, you were considered a traitor. There's just this kind of open vibe down here. And you see a lot of the same characters. Like I'll go to an open mat up at Legion or wherever, and I'll see some of the same guys that I see on Saturday morning at Clark's or wherever. So it's a great environment. And the level is generally very high. When I first moved down here, man, I was just getting tooled. And I thought, man, okay, I got to step it up here. And, now after a couple of years, I feel like I'm in the mix now. And, I'm able to deal with these, more elite kind of guys that are amazing down here.
Yeah. Now you touched on sort of fitting into an academy or landing your spot, right, at Clark's. I was recently talking to Adele Fiorino, the 2-time ADCC gold, champion for 2024. And she also mentioned that she tried, various academies and she found her place at Autos. That was just like the place. What is it for you, and what would you recommend people feel or experience when they choose an academy? I know this is highly personal, but perhaps for yourself.
Yeah, every academy will have there's a technical influence and a cultural influence. And if either of those are wrong for you, you'll know it pretty quickly. I came up under Roy Dean, and he had a very unique environment. It was a beautiful environment. It was clean. It was pristine, and classes ran right on time. There was a structure to it. He's a master communicator. He's a master of brief instruction. He doesn't over-explain. I came up under that. As a purple belt, I ended up moving, and really until now, I was pretty nomadic. And so I've trained in a lot of different environments. And, in part, I always kind of missed that. Sometimes that first influence you have in jiu-jitsu that becomes the most powerful one. It sort of shapes how you see the world and how you understand jiu-jitsu technically. And I feel like I was always on a search for what I had lost. And when I opened my school in Wyoming, I tried to recreate that environment. And so yeah, I always advise people, if you're looking for a new school, just go watch class, go see how they teach, how they train, how they treat their students. Are guys knuckleheads, or are they respectful? And then, talk to the instructor, and then jump in and just, you'll figure out whether the vibe is right. And sometimes, I always also recommend starting with the closest school to you, because you want to eliminate points of friction. And getting to class when it's a 45-minute drive or an hour in traffic and you're running late, there's too many opportunities to just not go that day. So start with the closest one. And if they have the right vibe, maybe it's not, the highest profile instructor, but sometimes that close academy, if it feels right and the vibe is right, that's going to be the place for you.
You did mention Wyoming. Can you share your experience of opening academy, ups and downs, the challenges and the wins of opening an academy in like a very small market?
I think that every jiu-jitsu student, especially by the time you get to about purple or so, you start thinking, it might be kind of fun to run a school. And especially if you get opportunities to teach. I've had opportunities to teach going all the way back to when I was a blue belt at Roy Dean's Academy, because it was a new school. And at one point, the blue belts were the senior students, and then the blue purples were the senior students. And it kind of went that way. And then as a purple belt, I got a chance to teach in Florida for about 6 months at Trent Lewis's academy. He got hurt. He had to have back surgery. And so it was always kind of in the back of my mind. I really enjoyed it. But I was older, and, there's that existential crisis of, man, do I really want to do this? Do I want to be the man? I don't know if I want to be the man. But we ended up moving, or we were thinking about moving to Wyoming to be closer to my ex-wife's family at the time. But there was no jiu-jitsu there. And I thought, maybe this is an opportunity to think about this more seriously. And we went and we visited, and we were driving down First Street, just downtown, and there was a for lease sign in a little space. And my ex elbowed me at the time, and she's like, "There you go. There's your school." And yeah, for a brief moment, I was really just thinking, man, this is a college town. They've got a wrestling team, and it's a pretty good wrestling team. They've got a football team. Man, do I really want to do this? But it was amazing. It was probably one of the most productive times in my own journey, having to bring up people from nothing to skill. And over the next, years, I ran that school, and it was fine. My role was there as a guide, as a mentor, as a teacher. I didn't have to be the toughest guy in the room. We had plenty of young bucks that were collegiate athletes that, by every measure, they were physically more dominant in that. And it taught me how to deal with that, how to deal with physical intensity when there's a low level of skill, and that's its own problem. And then it taught me to deal with physical intensity when there was more skill, And Roy Dean calls it finishing school when you open your own school as a brown belt or as a new black belt, because that's what really gets you deeply into the technique in a way that you don't get if you're just a hobbyist. And so I think it was great. It was fantastic. I miss it. I miss the obligation of having to go every day. And that really keeps your head in the game in a way that your head is not in the game if you're just training a couple times a week. You don't have to really think about jiu-jitsu all that much, but when you got to come up with a lesson plan every day or sometimes multiple times a day, your head has to really be in it. And so I think I really grew a lot during that time.
Roy Dean has all these great quotes. One of them that you'd mentioned previously was lubricating the technique with muscle. And you mentioned these people, the challenge of the super strong individuals. Can you expand on that sort of concept?
Yeah, when you're new at jiu-jitsu, there's only one pathway to success, and that's using your physical attributes. And they can be a real challenge. Someone who's strong, fit, mobile, dynamic, especially someone that has experience as a former athlete in some other domain, they can be a handful. And a lot of times it's those guys that they don't see the pathway through technique as much as the skinny guy that shows up and doesn't have any pathway to success absent developing good technique. And so, yeah, that impulse to just muscle techniques is irresistible. And look, we all use our physical attributes to the extent we have them. Everyone preaches technique over strength in jiu-jitsu. In some ways, that's an illusion. I mean, we all use whatever strength we have, but there are efficient applications of that strength. Sometimes just you've got the position, you're ready to get the submission, but man, this dude's strong. You got to put a little muscle into exposing that arm to get the arm bar, let's say. So yeah, you don't want to deny your strength, but you want to funnel it intelligently. And naturally, I think you'll do that as you get older in jiu-jitsu because those attributes will start to fail you, and there's no other pathway short of technique.
I was reading the research that I was doing on you. Throughout your career, it's almost like me and you are like Step Brothers, the movie, right? Like you're the Will Ferrell, I'm the John C. Reilly or something like that. We both have this. Let's go through like some of it here. You were in this rock band, right? And as I was a touring independent musician as well. You had this, by the way, people, he had this long, beautiful, curly Samson-like hair that gave him his superpowers. Software developer, entrepreneur, audio engineer, martial artist, as you are, your photography, single mother. You know, I was the classic latchkey kid of the 70s, 80s myself. Can you expand on this, being this sort of Renaissance curious type of individual and this sort of circuitous, path you took to this current iteration of yourself?
Some of that I think I got from my mom. She was fearless, and we moved a lot as a kid. And some of that was driven by her own demons. She had her issues, and she spent her life on the run from things. But the upside was that I got a lot of experiences as a kid, a lot of unique experiences as a kid. What I learned from her was that if you have an interest in something, why would you not just jump into the deep end of the pool feet first? And she also, I think, cultivated this attitude that you can do anything. You're smart, do it, just do it. And so I think it cultivated that curiosity. And, when I get into something, I'm not generally satisfied with superficial knowledge. I want to really go deep. And sometimes if you're able to sort of master something relatively quickly, or you kind of are able to get proficient at it, sometimes it's easy to lose interest in that thing. And jiu-jitsu is one of the constants in my life that I've never lost interest in. And I think it's because it's the perfect combination of the physical and the mental. A lot of the disciplines I've done have been mental disciplines. I was a software developer, and I was, other things. And, eventually you're like, well, is there more to this? Do I need to go farther with this? And then also some of that, I think, was just the circumstances of life. You're heading down a path, you see an opportunity. And, when I launched a software company, I was an audio engineer. I was a successful audio engineer. I was working on Family Guy. I had worked on Pocahontas and Lion King, and I was part of an Emmy award-winning team on an Oliver Stone film. And yeah, I wasn't looking for a new gig, but I started dabbling in web development and software development, and I created this product that I launched. And I didn't mean to pivot, but it started taking off. And eventually it was like, okay, this thing's going like a rocket ship. I got to jump on there and do it. And so, yeah, it's just that willingness. I think it came from my early life experiences where it's like Roy Dean tells me, he goes, dude, you always follow your bliss. And that's true.
Isn't it funny how you have all this experience in media and entertainment industry, and you came into this tech thing, and, I'm sure you got burnt out on that, as I did as well. And now you're making all this content, and you're sort of circling back to this kind of media optimizing kind of stuff with that experience, in audio. Has that served you in your content? Because your content is so fantastic, and it seems to be evolving as well.
Yeah, thank you. I have experience in production. Back when I was an audio engineer, we'd worked on so many projects that had a video component. And so I was part of the production team. And so through sort of osmosis, you get a sense for what is good production, what's bad production, what's good audio, what's bad audio. And so when I started making my own content, initially I'm like, no, the audio has to be pristine. And so I'd really focus on that. And I'm not a great video editor. I'm, passable, but I understand production, and I understand some of those elements of how to make something look good, at least. And so there's a quality that I try to bring to this that it's just based on my background and those experiences.
Well, we don't hear about a whole lot of ups and downs of individual paths. One story that really struck with your history is a software company, an acquisition. Acquisition went kind of sideways, and it sounds rather gut-wrenching. Can you expand on that, and how those feelings evolved as well?
Yeah, I'm doing what I'm doing now as a byproduct of the fact that ultimately my software company failed. We got acquired. And it's a long story, as these things are. And usually during these acquisitions, they're not handing you cash. They're giving you a share package in the acquiring entity. On the day that I signed that deal, I was worth 36 million bucks. And you're pretty elated, I have to say. You're like, okay, I did it. I'm retired. I'm good. But yeah, you can't sell your shares for a few years. There's a contractual obligation there. And I still had some work that I had to do as part of this acquisition. But within less than 2 years, the thing had gone off the rails. It imploded. The investors left. They pulled the funding. Like, it just fell apart. And I went from that elation to standing there thinking, holy cow, my life has imploded. And to extract myself from this deal, I mean, it took a year or two to even extract myself, threats of lawsuits and the whole thing. It literally cost me everything. My 401k, my savings, my house that was paid for was now mortgaged. Like, it cost me everything to extricate myself. And I made some bad decisions during that period of time, just out of my sense of obligation to my team. We got to pay the team. There's no money. Okay, I'll pay the team out of my own resources. And when I was standing there in the debris of this thing, then it hits you, man, I got nothing. I've gone from everything to literally nothing. And on the heels of that, my relationship of 32 years, my marriage came to an end. And so it was this, dual atomic bomb in my life. And that'll put you into a dark place. For about a year, I was in a very, very dark place. The only thing that saved me really was the fact that I had to go teach class every day. And so I had my little Jiu-Jitsu academy. Honestly, it was kind of a hobby academy in Wyoming. It's not a Jiu-Jitsu school in Wyoming is not a big money maker. And even though I ran it professionally, I treated it like a real business. It wasn't enough to really say, okay, fine, I'll do this. But when you're on the mat in jiu-jitsu, all of your problems are gone. That's one of the beautiful things about that discipline. I think of it as dynamic meditation, because you're just in it. Your mind is clear, it's free. All you can think about is the problem this opponent presents to you. So that really helped me. But after about a year, it was really Roy Dean. He said, dude, you got to get out of Wyoming. What are you doing there? You're clinging on to this little school just because it's all you have right now. You have to get out of there. And he said, look, move into my house. I'm going to be in Alaska mostly over the next 6 months, 8 months, whatever. Just move into my house, reset, figure it out. Come down here and figure it out. And so I sold my little school to one of my brown belts, and he's doing great now. He's a black belt now, and he's really expanded it. He's doing great things in Wyoming. And so I moved into Roy's house as kind of the depressed, forlorn guy. And so I thought, well, what's next? What do I do next? And I couldn't go back into tech. I was so burnt out. I just couldn't do it. And so it begins with an assessment of what you have. I said, okay, let's think about, what do I have? Well, I've got some good camera gear. I like to do production. I like video stuff. And I had started this little YouTube channel that I had before this whole thing went south. And I thought, okay, there's maybe a pathway here. I love this stuff. I'm passionate about it. I'm a decent instructor. So I thought, well, here we go. Rick Ellis 4.0. It seems like I've had many iterations of my life and my career. Here comes a new one. Let's do it. And it's funny, the key to life, the key to everything is building momentum. Initially, there's no momentum. You have to sort of force that, you have to get that little snowball compacted and start trying to push it down the hill. And eventually it starts creating some momentum, and then you feel like, okay, this is working. Okay. And you start feeling good about it. And you fast forward to today, and I'm in a great place. I'm happy. I'm in a killer relationship with this amazing woman, and I'm training with amazing people, and I've got some ideas that I'm spinning up, some business ideas and things. And my life's great now, but it took a while. And the thing is, nobody can tell you when you're in a dark place, hey, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. You'll get through this. Like, all the platitudes, all the pep talks that you get, they mean nothing, right? You have to go through it yourself. and just will yourself to keep moving forward, even though you're depressed and it's hard. But eventually you realize, man, I was walking through the mud. The pathway is clearing up now, that my stride is better, and eventually you're running and towards something, and then life is great again. And so, yeah, my life is really good right now.
Are you still iterating? Are you still starting and stopping things?
Well, right now, the only thing I'm focused on is the jiu-jitsu stuff, or sort of the physical culture stuff. I have a project that I launched over at theartofskill.com, which is going to be our media platform, our instructional platform. I'm really working hard on that and building. I can't really see too far beyond these things. You have to give it everything. When you start something new, you have to obsess a little bit, and you have to really just do it, fully. And so that's where I'm at.
Well, let's talk about Art of Skill. What is it? What's happening with it? What are the plans?
Well, when I launched the YouTube channel, the funny thing is it wasn't originally supposed to be me, or at least not entirely me. I had this idea, and I was inspired by masterclass.com, which is beautifully crafted instructional courses, very elevated, some of the best people in the world, beautiful production, like everything about it was top notch. And I thought, man, it would be really cool to do something like that in the world of, jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu adjacent physical modalities, restorative modalities, maybe self-improvement, all these things sort of wrapped into one umbrella. And I had this idea. I thought, okay, this will be really cool. I'm going to do this. And so I created a little bit of initial content on the YouTube channel, just as placeholders, just have a little bit of stuff there while I figured out how we were going to scale this thing up. But then my life imploded, as we just talked about. And I had to shelve that idea. In fact, I walked away from the YouTube channel for like a year. I didn't do any content. I didn't even look at the YouTube channel. I literally just was trying to work through this issue, this, life change. And then after about a year, one day I logged in and I looked at the YouTube channel, and I'm like, oh, wow, I've got 6,000 subscribers, and I've literally done nothing over the past year. And I thought, okay, maybe there's something to this. Maybe this is the path. And so I started making content, and the channel became about me and my journey and the things that I was thinking about and the things that I'm interested in. But in the back of my mind, I was always thinking, the Art of Skill is really more than me. And I want to bring this project to life. But it wasn't until recently, now that I'm in San Diego and I'm really connecting with people, I've been making really good connections all over the world of jiu-jitsu and other places, and getting invited to do really amazing things with cool people. And I thought, okay, now is the time to do this, even though my goal is to have a team around this and to really go big, to do it in a big way. But right now it's just me, and our first course is out. It's a Roy Dean course. Our second course is going to be Miles Lucas teaching breath work for jiu-jitsu. He's the American Wim Hof, and he's a great jiu-jitsu black belt. And then after that, Javier Vasquez, who's a masterful guy, incredible jiu-jitsu. World-class, absolutely world-class. A lot of people don't know how good this guy is. And his perspective is shaped by the fact that he used to be a UFC fighter. And so his whole jiu-jitsu is based around not getting hit, not getting exposed, and forcing your opponents to cooperatively move in ways that put you in a very dominant, advantageous position. And he's a master of leverage, of getting people to turn their back, getting people to put themselves in disadvantaged positions, because that's the only pathway. And so we're doing a course, we're in pre-production on it, and that's going to be next after that. And so, yeah, I'm scaling this thing up, and we're going for it, and might be looking for some funding at some point, and we'll see.
You've been leading companies and spearheading all this stuff, being in front of the camera quite a bit now, and being on several different podcasts, etc. Yet you mentioned that you're an introvert as well. And being an older person as well, back in the early days of jiu-jitsu, it was almost frowned upon to be on camera and to share this stuff, because it could be seen as sort of an ego type of thing or whatever.
Yeah.
How are you navigating all of this?
Yeah, I'm reasonably comfortable with it now. I've always said that I'm not entirely comfortable being the protagonist of my own reality show, but I sort of feel like this path was kind of thrust upon me because I had nothing else. I had jiu-jitsu. Initially, every time I would push the submit button on that next video that goes on YouTube, I'd have an existential crisis. I'd be like, oh God, do I really want to do this? And I wouldn't even go back and look. I'd post it, I'd publish it. I couldn't even go back and watch myself. And in part, I'm a little vain, admittedly, and I'm looking older, and I look at myself on camera and I'm like, oh my God, who's this old guy? And so, there's all this kind of internal narrative that you deal with. But it's been 4 years now that I've been doing this. So I'm pretty comfortable with it. Ultimately, with theartofskill.com, the platform, I see myself just as a conduit to other people. And so that sort of fulfills the vision. It's less pressure on me to have to be always the guy that comes up with that great piece of content for that week.
Do you enjoy that? Do you enjoy being like the connector, in a way?
Yeah, I really do. Yeah, very, very much so. In part because I'm curious and I like training with people. I like learning what makes people tick, maybe sort of like what you do. Even though I'm an introvert, I do like people. It's not that I'm not an antisocial introvert, and I can be selectively extroverted, as we all kind of can. So yeah, I really like connecting with people.
When you think of your fondest memory, what comes to mind?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I don't know if I can end. Wow. Fondest memory. Man, there's so many. There's so many great memories in life. And the fondest memory might be your fondest memory for a time, and then you have another one that's just as good. But if I had to just select something off the cuff, probably it's earning my black belt. It deep into my 50s, I had trained so hard. Roy Dean's tests, the crucibles, they're grueling. And there's a lot that you don't see in those videos. It takes a lot of preparation and a lot of hard work. And I was hammering so hard. I tore my labrum in my shoulder preparing for that. About 2 months earlier, I went into that thing with a torn shoulder and cortisone injections in it to be able to deal with the pain. And so, yeah, I got through that. And I was really proud of myself that I did it. I put in the work. And I did it. And I was proud of myself that I stuck with it. I thought I had quit as a purple belt. I got injured twice pretty severely. I had back surgery, I had shoulder surgery. And so, you go through the ups and downs of jiu-jitsu to earn your black belt. And it's not the end, it's the beginning. Now that I've been a black belt for a while, I realize that there are layers and layers and layers of depth to this thing. But I think that moment really stands among the very biggest achievements, I think.
One of my favorite bits of information that you shared on has been this science of aging and heart rate decline. Can you explain that? Because when I try to explain it to people, I just butcher it. I say, as you get older, your heart's not working as great or whatever. But can you illuminate us?
Yeah, I mean, how do you quantify the decline as you get older? Well, your joint integrity starts to go. Your joints aren't as lubricated. They're stiffer. That's a big one. Really, the stiffness in your spine, the stiffness in your shoulders, and that becomes a limiting factor. But the other big limiting factor is your maximum heart rate declines. And jiu-jitsu is very anaerobic. We tend to train at a higher percentage of our max heart rate than, say, other things. Some sports, there's, moments of explosive output followed by a moderate pace. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, we tend to keep ourselves at a higher range of output, usually somewhere in the anaerobic zone. The problem is that percentage that you can train at, the percentage of your max, every decade is less and less and less and less. You lose 10 points roughly of max heart rate for every decade of your life. So if your max heart rate is 200 when you're 20, at 30, it's 190. At 40, it's 180. At 50, it's 170. At 60, it's 150. And that's a massive difference. When you're going up against a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old, that's a humongous difference. You can't match that pace. You end up completely redlined. You end up gassing out. As you get older, you gas out easier. Like all the systems just aren't firing as well. You're not as resilient. And so I think max heart rate, and no one ever told me that. I think just as I was exploring this question of why, as you get older, things get harder, your neurology changes, your ability to recognize that there's a moment that something has to happen here, and your ability to execute that thing. Things are just firing a little bit slower. But yeah, the heart rate is, I think, a big issue.
I love that you can quantifiably explain that, because sometimes you'll hear, maybe you just need to work out harder. Or, this guy can do this and you can't do that.
And and you can get fitter, of course. You can be fitter or you can be less fit as an older athlete. And I encourage everyone to work on your cardio, go do your hill sprints once a week, go whatever. But you still have a hard limit. There's a hard, when I was training, my max heart rate was about 170 when I was training for my black belt. During that 6-7 months of just consistent training, I was doing zone 1 training. I was doing the hill sprints. I was doing high intensity continuous training. I was doing weightlifting. I was doing everything. And I was hammering in jiu-jitsu really hard every day. I got my max heart rate up to 180 during that time. And I was surprised at that. I was really, really surprised. I hit 182 one day on the stair climbing machine at the gym. I'd go every other day, do my 90 minutes of steady state. And I hit 182. And I thought, I don't even know if this is safe at my age to just not only, redline myself, but I'm 10 points higher than what I should be statistically for my age. So I think that as you get older, you can continue to build some attributes and all that. Whether it's safe to hammer that hard or not, I mean, that's a different question. But there's still a hard limit.
I know this is largely contextual and depends, but generally, what do you look for when promoting individuals?
Well, there's two sides of the coin. There's your technical knowledge, understanding your, do you know how to execute an armbar? Do you know how to execute a triangle choke? Do you know how to escape side mount in a variety of ways? There's that piece. And then there's obviously the live performance piece. You have to be able to execute against resistance. And, one thing about the Roy Dean lineage, and this goes back to Roy Harris, who's Roy Dean's instructor. Roy Harris was one of the first to actually try to quantify, what does a blue belt need to know? What does a purple belt need to know? Before that, it was sort of like, yeah, he's given the blue belts a hard time. Let's hand him a blue belt. He's given the purple belts a hard time. Let's hand him a purple belt. But if you're just basing it on your execution on the mat live, well, everybody plays their A game. You might have a very simple game. In fact, there are incredible people at the highest levels of competition that just play a very simple game that constitutes their A game. That tells you nothing about how broad their knowledge is, how deep their knowledge is. And so I think there needs to be some objective standards there. And so for blue belt under me or under Roy or really under Harris, there are a certain amount of knowledge that you have to have. You have to know guard passes and sweeps and takedowns and mount escapes. And, there's a lot of stuff that you have to know, nuts and bolts kind of stuff. But then you have to be able to put it together in a way that allows you to be effective at that level.
Are there intangibles that you're looking for as well? Non-technical type of thing?
Yeah, it sort of depends on the student. If they're young and athletic, you want the intangibles to be tenaciousness, and you don't want them to quit. You can't be someone that quits mentally and all those sorts of things. For the older athletes, sometimes those intangibles are not quite as important. You're not going to promote someone who's a jerk or who's a bad training partner, but jiu-jitsu tends to weed those people out anyway. And over the years, you tend to become more humble and your ego's under control and all that. But I think it just depends on the student.
Can you talk about the Old Grappler Summit, what it is, and just expand on that?
Yeah, that was just an idea I had down here in San Diego. I thought it'd be fun to do a meetup, a get-together, a multi-day training session with the over 40 crowd. And so I thought, let me see, maybe I didn't know if there'd be a big market for it. I didn't know if it'd be successful. I decided to do the first one. I was terrified when I announced it. I thought, here we go, because I've booked I've got a dojo expense. I've got to pay Clark for his space. I've got a caterer I've got to pay for our social event, our social gathering. I got to make swag. I got to do all this stuff. I have no idea. Can I even break even? So I launched the first one. It sold out incredibly fast. We got about 30 people and had a great weekend down here, 3-day training event in San Diego. There's 7 hours of training and, a few hours of just bonding, social gathering. We do that the first day. We have our big party the first night, so that everyone kind of bonds, and then the training's better. Everyone kind of knows each other. And it was great. I learned a bunch of stuff doing it, and it was a lot of fun. I might do one a year. I don't know what moving forward. I have an idea that maybe Old Grappler Summit will eventually go beyond me as well. It's yet another one of these ideas I have where it'd be fun to select some of the best guys in the world who are getting up there in years and bringing them in and trying to do something. Maybe it's an all-inclusive, maybe we all go somewhere, maybe. I mean, who knows? Right now, it's just me doing these things. I set it up as a brand. I wanted it to be branded and to be professional so that it has the opportunity to maybe scale if we decide to go in that direction.
That's what I was going to say. Boy, I hope this can scale because, yeah, there seems to be a demand. I was speaking with my coach saying, gosh, I wish we had an older person's program, like an older master's type of program. Yeah. Although you'd have to pull from the neighboring academies as well or something like that. But then I stumble upon this and I'm like, wow, this would be really cool.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And, we're all kindred spirits on the mat and we all lick our wounds and we share the war stories of all the aches and pains. And it's inspiring too. I had, I gave awards, a few different awards that I made. One of them was for the person that traveled the farthest to get here. And that person came from somewhere on the East Coast. I forget where they came from. But another award was the oldest grappler. And I had a guy who was mid to late 60s. And he was a studly guy for being that old. I mean, he was still in it doing jiu-jitsu, and I was inspired by him. So I think it's a chance for us to get together. And, sometimes at some schools, there just aren't a lot of guys over 40. And if you're the only one, you're in for a hard road. And a lot of times that was me. Like almost everywhere I've ever trained, I've been either the oldest or among the very oldest. And so I know firsthand what it's like to be that guy. And really, it reinforces the need to be technically proficient. There are technical solutions always to these problems that these younger athletes pose, but it takes a while. You got to train for a while. It takes the willingness to just be smashed a lot and not have that solution in that moment, but in time you will.
Well, anecdotally, it seems to me like this older market, these people starting in their 40s now seem to be an increasing type of trend. And I suspect it's because, you become kind of an empty nester or your kids are getting older, get a little more independence in that regard. And this is perhaps something that you've always wanted to do. You're dropped in your 20s, your teens or something like that. It just appears like there's a niche for that. And I don't know if it's anything new, but it to me, it seems to be expanding. And I just don't know that that particular market is served enough.
Yeah, what's funny, my friend Lauren Stunning, who's a killer black belt from the Chicago area, he says that jiu-jitsu is the new golf. Yeah.
That's great.
And it's kind of true. It's kind of true, and a lot of times it's the parents, they put their teenagers in jiu-jitsu and they're sitting on the sidelines and then eventually they jump in and listening to Joe Rogan or Jocko or whoever, all the other influencers that are, pushing people to jiu-jitsu. But yeah, there's a lot of guys who are starting later in life. And there's a lot of guys that are starting incredibly young. I trained with this 16-year-old kid the other day who dropped into Clark's on an open mat. One of the nicest kids. And he's a blue belt at 16, but honestly, this dude is a black belt or close to it. Honestly, he was close to black belt in terms of his execution. He's been training since he was 8. Sure. And one of the most fun roles I've had in San Diego was with this kid. Like we went back and forth and back and forth and back. It was so much fun. So you're seeing the two ends of the spectrum. You're seeing the young kids that are coming up, and that kid, he's like a rocket ship. By the time he's 20, 21, I mean, holy cow. I mean, he will destroy me and probably every other guy over 40. But then there's the older guys coming into it. And, it's a beautiful sport. It's a lot of fun. And the impulse is to show up and you want to conquer the world in a day. And a lot of times you come in and you end up getting hurt because you're just trying too hard. You want to do too much. So, for those older athletes, it's a slower journey. Keep yourself safe. You can do it, but it's going to be harder.
You mentioned the young kids, and I like to refer to these young kids that are coming into it in their 3 to 5 years old right now on the regular, which really wasn't the case.
No.
Back then, you see these kids at ADCC or even IBJJF or whatever now that are competing at a level that is unbelievable. And I mean children, right? Children.
You used to be able to be a hobbyist in jiu-jitsu and go win the world championships. When I started jiu-jitsu, nobody was a professional, really. I mean, some of the Brazilians or some of the people that ran schools, they were professionals. But you could just be a regular person and go and do really well at these competitions. But those days are way long over.
Does the belt system get blurred then as well? Because as you mentioned this, you said yourself, the 16-year-old kid is effectively a black belt.
Yeah.
It seems like we're at this weird, and I think past this inflection point of where, there were these people that were starting in their 30s, whatever, and they're black belts, and there was a certain level. But now there's these kids that have been doing it in mass for quite some time now they're at an unbelievable level.
Yeah, I mean, let's forget jiu-jitsu for a moment. Let's say you're a musician, you're a pianist, you're a guitarist. You can be a professional, right? You can be really good. You can be a teacher. You can have acquired a lot of skill as a musician, right? But you're still not elite. You're not a virtuoso. You're not one of these kids that started when they're 8 and by the time they're 16, they're world class. Now, does that lessen the fact that you are still a professional or you're good at it or No, it doesn't. It just shows that there's a depth to all these things. And so you have to, I think, recalibrate a little. What does a black belt mean? Is a black belt someone that can defeat everybody who's below you? No, that's ludicrous on its face. Is a blue belt someone that can beat every white belt in the world? No, we all come in different shapes and sizes and all that stuff. And so I think that's why having technical requirements are very, very important, so that you can say, look, this guy's put in the time. He's been training for 15 years. His, understanding of jiu-jitsu is fantastic. His timing is great. Everything's great. He's effectively a black belt. Maybe he's a brown belt still, but he can't execute at 50 the way this 20-year-old can. He's not going to be able to get the tap as decisively, as definitively as that guy. So do you hold him back? No, I don't think you do. I think you acknowledge that guy's a black belt, but there's still levels to the game. And I'm reminded that training with Clark Gracie, he's a 3rd degree black belt, but yet he's insanely good. I mean, he just destroys every black belt that walks through the door, and there's elite world-class guys that come in that just get tooled. What does that mean? Shouldn't he have like 1,000 stripes on his belt? But no, he's only put in enough time in jiu-jitsu to be a 3-stripe, but in that time that he's been in it, he's really maximized his development.
What comes top of mind when you think of an aha moment?
There have been 1,000 aha moments.
Yeah.
At every belt level, you have epiphanies and you have breakthroughs in terms of your game, and you put some things together. Sometimes it's from one day to the next. You have a training session and you just walk out of the school on cloud 9. You're like, okay, I think I put this together. I've got this 2 technique combination. I think I understand how to do it now. And so there's always epiphanies. And, at black belt, I have lots of epiphanies, especially training with someone like Clark. I'll watch him teach a technique, and it's a technique that I teach, but yet his focus on the details is a little different than mine. And I'll ask him about that. I'm like, why do you put your hand there? That's real interesting. And he'll explain, no, that's because it avoids this particular counter or something. He's operating on such a higher level of precision. And so there's always epiphanies there that I have almost every time I train with him. I have some kind of an epiphany. Probably my biggest epiphany in the sort of white to almost purple belt level, white, blue belt. One day I realized I know enough at this point. Not that you can ever know enough, but I know enough. What I need to do to be effective is go deeper into these techniques. Because at white belt, you're just amassing as much knowledge as possible. You're going to learn more as a white belt than at any other level in your journey, because you're having to learn all the big stuff. What's side mount? How do you play guard? How do you do this? How do you do that? There's a million things to learn. Ergo, you can't go deep into those things yet. You're operating at a very superficial level. But the blue belt to purple belt journey is one in which you go from technique accumulation to technique depth. And I think that was probably the biggest epiphany I had at that moment, was that, okay, I think I have enough here. If I can just put it together in a more effective way, then I'm going to be more effective. And then I started focusing on really going deeper with those things.
Developing as an instructor, a teacher, someone who produces content, how do you keep that sword sharp, so to speak? What are you reading or researching or anything to develop in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, I'm constantly watching jiu-jitsu on YouTube. You're in it. And then a lot of times the the conundrums that you face on the mat will always send you home thinking about it. And okay, that didn't work so well. Why? I've been trying this one thing for a long time and it kind of works. Why doesn't it work? And so, yeah, there's always something to keep working on. And then also, if you teach routinely, you have to be thinking about, okay, who is in the audience? And I think if you're going to be a professional teacher in jiu-jitsu, you have to be able to read the room and you have to be able to adjust what it is you're teaching based on the reality of who's in the room. When you're a novice instructor, you tend to just teach what you're working on in your own game. You want to show the cool stuff that you're working on, but eventually you show up, maybe you've got a couple ideas for lesson plans, but you look in the room and you're like, I don't think this is the right group for that. And then you have to do something a little different. So yeah, I think you have to just keep your head in it. And if you're passionate about it, I think that you're naturally going to do that.
Who are like some of those masters that you like to watch in various verticals, perhaps, too, that are able to do this effectively? I know I like to go to class sometimes just to watch the instructors, to learn from them, just how are they instructing, or even other type of content as well.
Yeah, that's underrated in my opinion, just watching class. I had a student who he blew his knee out getting heel hooked, and he was a blue belt at the time, and he was in class every single day. He was really motivated. And he was very depressed. He got hurt. And I said, dude, you just got to come to class. Just come to class. So for the next 3, 4 months, 5 months, he was just sitting on the sidelines, watching. And I would talk to him. I'd say, how's it going, man? He goes, dude, this is so good. I'm learning so much about just things that I do that are wrong, or this or that or the other. So yeah, watching is very useful. So, people get hurt. They tend to disappear for a while. But if you can just keep showing up, that's really good. But as far as who I enjoy, man, I mean, there's a million guys who are great at jiu-jitsu. I own at least 100 instructional DVDs, back when DVDs were a thing. I have a big case and I've watched a million things, Saulo Ribeiro and Carlos Machado and Jean-Jacques Machado and Draculino and Roger Gracie and, all the big names. And, I'm a fan of a lot of those guys. I think I'm drawn to instructors that don't over-explain. I think some of them, and I won't mention names, I respect them immensely as practitioners and as teachers, but sometimes you have to suffer for the knowledge. They just go on this long journey, or they want to download every nuance of that technique in one fell swoop. But if you're not ready for that level of detail, it's just noise. And so I really appreciate the guys. Jean-Jacques comes to mind. He is a master of this, he's almost a storyteller in how he approaches jiu-jitsu. He's one of my favorite instructors. Draculino's a lot like that. And others, Roy Dean, of course, and Roy Harris is great. And I mean, there's so many that are incredible.
Isn't that amazing how like everyone sort of learns differently? I mean, some people thrive on that type of verbose, really ingrained detail, whereas someone like myself, that's not me at all. I'm quite the opposite as well.
Yeah, I agree. John Danaher DVDs are 9 hours long, or I guess they're not DVDs these days. It shows you how old I am. But, and people, they want to just go deep. But I think that some people, they confuse listening to all that with skill acquisition. It comes back to knowledge versus skill.
Right.
Sometimes you amass all this information, but yet you're not going to be able to put it together. And sometimes that level of sophistication is actually going to hurt you in the short term trying to put that thing together, because you don't even know what key point or key detail is important. And I learned that as an instructor. You teach the arm bar and then you're scanning the room while people are doing it, and you have an epiphany in that moment. You realize, you know what? I need to really emphasize elevating the hips and swiveling more. They're leaving a big gap there. And so then the next time you teach it, you realize, okay, there's 3 points that I need to make here. There's other details too, but maybe I'll walk over to each individual cluster, and the ones that are more advanced, I'll say, listen, there's a tweak here that you might think about. The white belts, they're not ready for that yet. So yeah, I agree that a lot of people, they like just sort of consuming this information. I would bet that with those guys, they're not able to translate that into skill.
You mentioned observing your students. When do you see yourself in your student?
Every school, every instructor brings a technical influence and also a cultural influence, an attitude, a way of playing jiu-jitsu. And so naturally, I think just by virtue of you being you and you teaching jujitsu the way that you understand it and you know it and reinforcing the values that you think are important, you'll naturally cultivate people that eventually they look a lot like you when they train jujitsu. Well, there are lots of different body types, different ages and things. You don't want necessarily all your students to play the game exactly like you. And as a good coach, you need to be able to teach everything, including the things that aren't really part of your A game. There's lots of stuff that I almost never do when I roll, but yet I teach them. And I think I'm pretty good at teaching those things, but they're just not part of how I express jujitsu. And so there has to be that sort of balance between that. But I think that ultimately your students are going to be a reflection of you and your attitude and how you see the world.
Can you tell me a time that you considered quitting and why?
Yeah, well, I got hurt. I had moved to Maine. And again, it was a long, convoluted story, but I've bounced around a lot in life. But I ended up in Maine. I was training with Alexi Cruz, who was Ricardo De La Hiva's first black belt. Heavy De La Hiva school. And that was great. I actually learned a lot. I still, to this day, I'm not really a De La Hiva player, but I learned a lot of counters and what to do about the berimbolo and, a lot of this sort of stuff. But I hurt my back. I blew a disc out in my low back, and it caused really immense nerve pain shooting down my leg. I lost the ability to use my calf. My calf muscle was dead. And so surgery was mandatory at that point. They had to relieve the pressure on the sciatic nerve. And so that set me out for a year. And I set a goal. You talk about watching class or, trying to learn without physically participating. I've always been a list maker, and I have lists and lists and lists of techniques and categorize and subcategorize and all that. And I set as a goal when I got hurt with my back, I said, you know what? I'm going to come up with a list of 1,000 jiu-jitsu techniques by all the positions, categorize and all that stuff. And so I would just watch and consume a lot of media. And when I'd see something, okay, there's a good technique, I'm going to reference it. Where's that time stamp and all that? And so that kept me in it. I felt like when I came back after that back injury, my knowledge had increased. My skill wasn't any better, but I had learned a whole lot of stuff that I didn't really know, or, nuances of things that I did know. But then about 4 months in, I tore my rotator cuff on my right side. And it was about 14 months before I could really use my arm at full extension and do all the things that I could do without any pain or discomfort. And, that puts you into the stages of grief, having that second injury. And I thought I was done. I quit. I called Roy and I said, dude, I think I'm done with jiu-jitsu. And he didn't try to talk me out of it. He knew that I had to go through those stages of grief. And he said, dude, it's all good. It is all good. You had a good run. You made it to purple. It's all good. And that was the perfect thing to say, because it relieved pressure to me. I wasn't ready to even think about coming back. He knew it. I knew it. Everybody knew it. And I truly thought I was done. But talking about kids again, my daughter, who was 8 at the time, I took her to a kids-only jiu-jitsu school. And the instructor, Sean Durfee, this black belt who was under J-Jack up in Maine, he would yell at me from the sideline. I was sitting on the sidelines. He'd call out to me, he goes, hey, Rick, a couple brown belts and me, a couple friends, we get together on Thursdays. You should join us, man. You should jump in, And so he kept pestering me. He kept bugging me, and just sort of, there's an energy in a jiu-jitsu school. You walk in, sometimes you're stiff, you're tired, you don't know if you want to train, and you walk in and there's energy in the air, and all of a sudden you're feeling it and you're feeding off of it. And you're like, yeah, okay, I'm into this. And so I did. I started jumping in on Thursday, and then I started training with J-Jack, with his coach. And then a short while after that, I ended up getting my brown belt under Roy at a retreat in Lake Arrowhead with Huron Gracie and a bunch of other guys there. And I was back in it. And then I opened my school not too long after that.
I want to list some of Rick's injuries here. He had this great image of this body that I'll put in here. You could see, let's talk, it's broken nose, torn labrum, popped rib, hyperextended elbow, torn groin, sprained MCL, hyperextended ankle, hyperextended ankle again, torn finger ligament, blown disc, hyperextended elbow again, and sprained back, torn rotator cuff surgery and dislocated clavicle.
Yeah, that's my most
Wow,
recent
man.
one. Yeah, that clavicle one, it's driving me nuts, man. That is such a terrible injury because it just hurts, man. The sternoclavicular joint is this little junction here, and literally your whole shoulder floats. So the only connection to your body is that joint. And when you dislocate that, man, and here it is 6, 7 months later, I'm still dealing with nerve pain. And I rolled last night. I trained a little bit. I went and taught class up at Steel MMA. This morning I'm all jacked up again.
It's incredible, man. The shoulder, I had this lat type of thing, and now my shoulder too. I had some sort of shoulder injury, and I currently don't have like medical insurance, so I can't get in there and see what's going on. And shoulder's a real pain in the ass, man.
Yeah, they're tough. You do think it's possible to train safely. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, you start jiu-jitsu late in life, you're just going to be a string of injuries. We're talking, that list, we're talking over 20 years. And I had a really long run from the time I came back from those injuries as a purple belt, really until this thing recently. I mean, that's, I don't know how many years, decade or more. I have not had any injuries. I've been, and I think with skill comes the ability to train safer, because I feel like sort of like when you first get your driver's license at 15, for that next couple of years, you are the most dangerous you will ever be driving a car, because you haven't been through all the oh crap moments where like there's a weird traffic pattern, or you're following a bus too close and you go to merge and there's a car there, or whatever. There's all these things you have to go through and make a catalog of things that can go wrong. And then after that, you're fine. You've been through them all. And I feel like jiu-jitsu is like that a little bit. As a white belt, you're just going crazy, using your body in ways that, you haven't learned. Oh, you shouldn't post out like that. That could hurt your elbow. Shouldn't do this. You shouldn't, create too much torsional energy. You're going to blow your back out. You're going to this, you're going to that. So I think you have to go through that phase, and then, you're safer. You have a much more intuitive understanding of when you need to shift your knee because it's compromised. Oh, I could get in danger here. But yeah, you do tennis every day, you're going to, hurt something.
You mention yoga quite a bit. Can you expand on your relationship with yoga and why?
I wish it was better. Yoga bores me, to be honest. It's incredible. Yoga's amazing. And Roy Dean has been a yoga practitioner for years and years and years, decades. I mean, it's the yin to his yang. He considers it the thing that sort of puts you back together, because in jiu-jitsu, we are rounded. We're very kyphotic. Everything is in this forward orientation. Our neck is forward. Everything is tight. And then what do? You sit at a desk all day with rounded shoulders, tight hamstrings, forward neck. And you have to be able to go in the opposite direction and reverse those things. And I wish that yoga didn't bore me, because then I would think I would do it more. But I try to do a little every day. I've been doing foundation training, and I do a little yoga, and it's not really structured. It's more about exploration of your own body and figuring out where you're tight, where you're sore, where you need a little extra work. Just this morning, I got up, I did a little foundation training because my low back was real stiff after training last night. And so, yeah, I'm a fan of those restorative modalities, and I wish I was a little more diligent and disciplined. I wish I had started that stuff much earlier in my journey either, because when I started jiu-jitsu my first decade, all I did was train jiu-jitsu and I didn't do anything else.
This isn't medical advice or anything, people. Peptides. So I've been playing with all BPC 157 and TB 500, which is a peptide. I had an MCL tear, really bad grade 3. It seemed anecdotally to really help accelerate that quite a bit. This shoulder issue that I'm referring to, and exploring that now, and we'll see. That's kind of an in-progress thing. Your experience with that and your thoughts on it now that you've played around with it quite a bit.
Yeah, a good friend of mine, black belt over at Clark's, Michael Sands, he's the one that turned me on to it initially. He said, hey, you should look into this. And so, being kind of the nerd that I am, I did a deep dive and listened to a lot of podcasts and watched a lot of stuff and did a bunch of research. And I thought, okay, this stuff seems to be safe. Peptides are something that your body produces naturally. I forget how many peptides your body is, like 700 or something, different peptides. Peptides they're bioregulators, right? In a lot of ways, your body needs to produce a certain compound for a certain purpose. There's a peptide that stimulates that, or a peptide that, triggers that. There's peptides in your gut. There's peptides all over there. That's where BPC comes from. It's a gut peptide. And so there's a lot of research going on right now on peptides. And the idea is that you're giving yourself something that your body, it's bioidentical to your body, and it's something your body produces naturally. You're just getting more of it exogenously instead of waiting for your body to produce it. Depending on the peptide, there's hair loss peptides, there's peptides that can help with prostate enlargement. There's a whole slew of them. I haven't even, gone that deeply into all the different peptides, but they do seem to show a lot of promise. BPC 157, the TB 500, that's a common stack. And they induce something called angiogenesis, which is the formation of blood vessels and capillaries. Anytime you have an injury, what you need is blood flow to that place, because that's what stimulates healing. And so these peptides seem to create the formation of capillaries and things to help transport blood to that place. And so I did it, a few months of it for my clavicle. And it seemed to help. Again, it's anecdotal. It seemed to help because I was able to start training again. I was able to get my range of motion back to even consider training again. And then my girlfriend, she broke her foot, and it was a clean break all the way through, but it didn't displace, so she didn't need to go into a cast. But 6 weeks from then, we were supposed to be at my son's wedding. And my girl said, I want to be on the dance floor dancing, because the way they built up the party, there's going to be this after party and dancing and all this kind of stuff. And I said, well, let's get you on peptides. So every morning I would, get the syringe ready, and I would go inject her in her belly. And I did that for her. And 6 weeks later, she was dancing on the dance floor. Not 100% healed, not 100% pain-free, but well enough that she could do that, which is pretty fast, actually really fast for a bone break. So, it's anecdotal, but it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think that the fact that the FDA just banned a whole bunch of peptides, and the reasoning for that is lame.
That means it's working.
Means it's working. And, Ozempic is a peptide.
Yes. A lot of people don't know that.
Modification. They modified the half-life so they can patent it. And I think what FDA is doing, there's running interference so that the big pharma companies can then make their proprietary blends and charge us $1 million for them.
Rick, I'm curious. How'd you learn to tie your belt?
Well, I did Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
That's right.
Before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I learned, I think it was either one of the students or the instructor. Someone showed me how to tie the belt. And I don't remember
No YouTube
now.
back then.
No. And now it turns out there's a bunch of different ways. There's the super lock, and I do the super lock version. That I did learn from Roy Dean. It's the old judo technique. It's a way of the old school judo tying, where you kind of tuck it and then you do it. And so I think he modified my old way of doing it.
So you never had to be shamed in front of the other students when having the one sticking up, sticking down?
At Clark's, if you forget your belt, you wear the pink loaner belt. And so it's pretty funny to see, you're looking at this guy, and I didn't know at first what that was. And I'm looking at this guy with a pink belt. He was a black belt. And I'm like, this is weird. And so I bump fists. I'm rolling with the guy, and I'm like, something's up here. This guy with this pink belt is really taking it to me.
One of the things I specialized in early on in my tech career was I was a CMS implementation type of guy, content management system guy.
Yeah.
And I know that you developed a particular content management system, and you were inspired by Blogger. And what was funny is in the early days when I was doing web dev stuff, and, we've both been through probably all the early .com ups and downs and explosions and opportunities. I had to do web dev with another guy in an office, this guy, Paul, and he was like one of the maybe number 2 employee or something. Ev Williams actually hired him to start this thing up called Blogger at the time in San Francisco, because I'm right next to there. And they went on to do that. And I know you were inspired by that. It's just so crazy. I'm surprised our paths haven't crossed earlier or something.
Yeah, for sure. Sounds like you were in it. I mean, I discovered the web in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. I was an audio guy, and one of my colleagues, he said, hey, have you heard of this thing called the World Wide Web? I'm like, what? No, what is that? And he's trying to explain it to me. Okay, you gotta get this thing called a browser, and you need a modem. It's got to plug into your phone, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, bro. But it sounds interesting enough that I went home and I got an Earthlink account, and I fell in love with it. And immediately I could see the potential. But the web was a static place. In the early days, websites were just brochures. There was no dynamic content. There was no community. It was just very static. And so it was systems like Blogger that was the big light bulb where I said, oh, wait a second, you can publish something, you can hit a button and now it's on your website, or someone can post a comment and now it's on your website. And I was like, this is it. This is the future of the web. And so I kind of intuitively, I think, knew it at the time. And then I was working for Nancy Sinatra, who's Frank Sinatra's daughter, and I built a website for her. She was an audio client, and I was dabbling in web design. And do you remember the show The Highlander?
Yes.
You're probably old enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was the music editor on that show.
Oh, you did their website, right?
And I did their website. So I built some early websites, but it was Nancy who, I just didn't have the time to give her, she was every day. She wanted me to do stuff. And I said, man, I got to empower her to take control of her website. And that became the impetus for designing a web app that could do that. And then it took on a life of its own. But yeah, we sounds like we've run in the same circles.
Isn't that amazing how timing is so important in everything, right? Let's talk about even Jiu-Jitsu, the online offerings and things like that in the early days. Things like MG Online and all these early day type of Jiu-Jitsu platforms and such, and how they've sort of changed and developed. And when you look at like a Fanatics, also where they took over a market and are still relatively huge, but now there's all these other type of offerings as well. How do you fit in that? And where do you see that whole segment going?
Yeah, it's a much more competitive landscape, and the barrier to entry is non-existent now. You can be your average guy in Paducah, Kentucky, running a little school, or your yoga teacher, whatever. There are platforms that let you just get on there and put your content, and now you're in business, right? So we're kind of in the golden era for content.
Right.
And, Hormozy is pushing his school thing. And, there's a ton of these sorts of platforms now that make it really easy. So it's a very saturated marketplace. And you add YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and all the social platforms with all this free content that it's like drinking from a fire hose. On the one hand, there's endless amounts of content. And so for me, as a content creator, what I'm trying to do is do sort of elevated content. You can stand out in a few ways. One is doing things that are unique that nobody else is doing. And that's, I think, part of the Art of Skill platform. It's going to be cultivating people that bring kind of a unique perspective that nobody else is doing out there. And so I think establishing a brand that's based on uniqueness and some of these other values of, elevated production, and also complementary, instead of just being disparate courses, you can go there and buy that course. You can go there if you're interested in that, or if you're interested in that, go over there. Having collections of instructionals that are all symbiotic, so that you can get onto a path that's going to help you physically in all areas of your life, and maybe in other realms as well. And so, yeah, it's tougher now. It's more competitive, but I think the opportunities are greater than ever in a lot of ways.
One of the things I've noticed is men that are dealing with things like this transition in life in terms of people, there's a lot of loneliness going on, right? With men. And we're blessed or fortunate enough to go to a Jiu-Jitsu academy and get some camaraderie and some community there. The importance of that and this issue with men happening in their lives. Can you touch on that whole thing?
Yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of guys are hurting out there, and I do think that jiu-jitsu can be an antidote to that, because you're right. There's something very powerful about shared struggle. As men, we are designed to struggle a little bit. When there is no struggle, we get complacent, we get sad, we get bored, we get introspective. If you're busy and you're struggling, you don't have time for any of that. And even you look at, let's say, domesticated animals. So if you take a domesticated pig, you put it in the wild, within 6 months, it will have grown thick fur and tusks, and it becomes a feral wild animal. Same thing with dogs. Dogs are domesticated wolves. Wolves don't have spots. They don't have all these traits. And so in a sense, we as men in the modern world are sort of domesticated animals, in that we don't have to fight very hard to survive. You can be a slacker and a loser and whatever. You're still going to be able to eat lunch, and you're going to survive, right? Whereas in the past, if you didn't toil during the summer months to survive in the winter months, you were going to get weeded out of the gene pool. And so I think there's just a lot of things about the modern world that can be difficult for that. But yeah, jiu-jitsu is a great way to have that shared struggle, that camaraderie. It's a rite of passage in a way. We don't have those things in the modern world where you have to go off into the desert and have a vision quest and come back with your name. But in jiu-jitsu, you earn that next belt, or there's the rites of passage. So I think it's very powerful for a lot of guys, and it can be a conduit for escaping some of those pitfalls.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time. If the listener wants to get more information about you and everything that you're up to, where can they go?
Well, theartofskill.com is our video platform. My personal site is rickellis.com, which is my name. And on Instagram, I'm The Art of Skill. On Facebook, you can find me under my name, Rick Ellis. And those are the main, and on YouTube, of course, that's my primary platform, The Art of Skill on YouTube is where I do most of my content.
Well, everyone, I'm your host, Adolfo Fronda. Thank you so much again for your time. Subscribe, thumbs up. Rick, again, thank you so much for your time. It was really an honor to have you on the show. I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, likewise, Adolfo, anytime. I think you're one of the best interviewers in this game, so I look forward to having many conversations with you.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone. See you guys next time.